Hi, welcome back. This is another shadowing practice video. If you understand English but speaking still feels difficult, you are in the right place. Shadowing is one of the fastest ways to improve pronunciation. You don't just listen, you speak with me. You copy the sounds, rhythm, and intonation. Don't rush. Accuracy is more important than speed. It's okay if you make mistakes. Mistakes mean you are learning. First, listen carefully, then repeat out loud with me. Speak slowly and clearly. Feel how the sentence flows. If it feels uncomfortable, that's normal. Your mouth and ears are adjusting. With every repetition, your English becomes more natural. Stay relaxed, stay focused, and most importantly, enjoy the process. Let's begin the shadowing practice now. I opened the door and looked outside. She felt tired, but stayed positive. I closed the window and sat down. She looked around and felt unsure. I picked up my phone and waited. He spoke quietly, but confidently. The air felt cold and fresh. I noticed her smile and relaxed. She took a step forward without fear. I listened closely to every word. He paused for a moment and nodded. I felt ready to continue. I opened the door and stepped inside. She took a deep breath and smiled softly. I placed my bag down and looked around. He waited quietly near the window. The room felt warm and peaceful. I checked the time and stayed calm. She walked slowly across the street. I heard a soft sound behind me. He leaned back and closed his eyes. I felt ready to speak again. I sat by the window and watched outside. She adjusted her jacket and nodded. I turned the page and kept reading. He stood still and listened carefully. The street grew quiet after the rain. I reached for my cup and took a sip. She looked up slowly and smiled. I noticed the light changing outside. He took a short break and stretched. I felt calm and focused. I walked down the street without rushing. She placed the book down and rested her hands. I looked at the screen and waited patiently. He took a slow breath and relaxed. The sky turned darker before the rain. I listened to the sound of the wind. She stepped forward carefully and stopped. I felt a quiet moment of peace. He glanced around and stayed silent. I stayed there for a while. I stopped for a moment and looked ahead. She held the cup gently and waited. I felt the air on my face. He leaned against the wall and rested. The light faded slowly in the room. I listened again and stayed focused. She moved quietly across the floor. I noticed a small detail and smiled. He waited nearby without speaking. I remained still and calm. I walked back slowly and stopped. She rested her hands on the table. I looked outside again and waited. He stayed quiet and thoughtful. The room became silent for a while. I took another breath and relaxed. She stood nearby and smiled softly. I noticed the change in the air. He remained calm and focused. I stayed present in the moment. He waited nearby without speaking. I remained still and calm. I slowed my steps and listened. She lifted her head and looked around. I felt the moment pass quietly. He placed his hands in his pockets. The sound faded away slowly. I kept my focus and stayed calm. She moved closer and stopped. I noticed the silence around me. He waited patiently without a word. I remained calm and present. I stood near the door and waited quietly. She looked at her watch and sighed softly. I adjusted my chair and sat comfortably. He glanced outside through the glass. The room felt warmer than before. I placed my hands together and stayed still. She listened carefully, without interrupting. I noticed a soft sound nearby. He remained silent and thoughtful. I leaned back slowly and relaxed. She folded her jacket and smiled. I waited a moment before speaking. He looked down briefly and nodded. The street felt empty at night. I focused on my breath and stayed calm. She stepped aside to let me pass. I turned my head toward the sound. He took a short pause before moving. I felt ready again to continue. The moment passed quietly. I heard a strange noise behind me. He sat down and took a deep breath. The room felt quiet and safe. I looked at the clock and smiled. She spoke softly and very clearly. I walked home slowly, enjoying the moment. He listened carefully, without interrupting. I felt calm inside and relaxed. I tied my shoes and stood up. She poured some water into the glass. I checked the mirror one last time. He answered the call without delay. The coffee cooled down on the table. I opened the notebook and wrote a line. She pushed the chair back and stood. I felt the floor under my feet. He placed the keys in his pocket. The screen went dark suddenly. I leaned forward to hear better. She crossed the room without speaking. I noticed the smell of food. He adjusted the volume slightly. The door closed behind me. I placed the cup down carefully. She glanced at me briefly. I felt the chair move slightly. He rubbed his hands together. The light flickered once. I checked my pocket again. She stepped back. Slowly. I heard a click nearby. He straightened his back quietly. The page turned by itself. I rested my arms on the desk. She nodded once in agreement. I watched the clock move forward. He opened the app and waited. The sound stopped completely. I pressed the button gently. She picked up the bag slowly. I felt the fabric between my fingers. He checked the note twice. The room echoed slightly. I stayed where I was, quietly. She closed the book gently. I waited for a sign patiently. He took the seat across from me. I stayed focused on the moment. I tightened my grip and moved forward. She tapped the screen once. I followed the sound with my eyes. He set the alarm carefully. The kettle began to boil softly. I checked the label before opening it. She folded the paper neatly. I noticed a reflection in the glass. He locked the door behind him. I stayed alert and calm. I picked up the package and checked the name. She opened the drawer carefully. I felt the surface with my hand. He turned the handle slowly. The machine started with a sound. I looked at the note again. She placed the item on the shelf. I followed the instructions step by step. He waited for the signal patiently. I finished the task and relaxed. You did a great job today. Take a moment and feel proud of yourself. Speaking a new language is not easy, but every sentence you repeat makes you stronger. Even when it feels slow, your progress is still real. Mistakes are part of the process. They mean you are learning, not failing. Each time you practice like this, your mouth, ears, and brain work together. Slow repetition builds clear pronunciation. Clear pronunciation builds confidence. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to continue. Try to practice a little every day. Even a few minutes make a difference. Listen carefully, repeat out loud. Trust the process. Your English is growing step by step. Thank yourself for showing up today. That is how real progress is made. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and I will see you in the next lesson.